In this video, I'll be giving you a quick overview on LEA-wide and school-wide actions. This is the first prompt in the Increased and Improved Services section. For each action that a district provides to an entire school or across the entire district, the district must provide an explanation of three things. First, the unique identified needs of the unduplicated student group or groups for whom the action is principally directed. Second, how the action is designed to address the identified needs and why it's being provided on an LEA-wide or school-wide basis. The words in bold have been added in those first two prompts are fairly new to the instructions. Unique identified needs was not there in the previous LCAP instructions. And while it has always been an expectation for the district to show why an action is being provided on an LEA-wide or school-wide basis, it's more explicit now in the instructions to the new LCAP. The third requirement here is to provide a metric that's going to be used to measure the effectiveness of the action in improving outcomes for unduplicated student groups. This is also new, requirement where the district will have to identify one or more metrics that are aligned to each action that is contributing and being provided on an LEA-wide or school-wide basis to show that the action is effective in improving outcomes for the unduplicated student groups for which it was designed. So let's talk a little bit about what does principally directed mean. In the past, oftentimes we've said an action is principally directed for our unduplicated students. Instead of just using those words, principally directed, here is how an LEA would demonstrate that an action is principally directed. It must explain the unique identified need of the unduplicated student group and how the action is designed to address those needs. That's really what we mean by principally directed, that we develop the action to principally benefit a particular student group. So you must include an explanation that includes those two items rather than using the words principally directed. An LEA describes how an action will be effective in meeting your goals for your unduplicated students when you provide an explanation of how the action is intended to improve outcomes for your unduplicated student group that the action is principally directed toward, to a greater extent than other students that might be served by this action. Here is an example response for an LEA-wide action. Please feel free to pause the video and read that over. Notice that something new this year is that this response is in a table format rather than a narrative response. And the reason for this is to ensure that you're addressing each requirement of this response. Notice the first column includes identified needs. Here you would include the academic data for your low-income students, as well as educational partner feedback that was considered in your needs assessment. Notice the second column includes how the action addresses the identified need and why the actions are provided on a school-wide basis. Finally, in the third column, it shows the data, the specific metrics that are going to be used to measure effectiveness for the student group for which the action was developed, which is low-income students. Here is a non-example. Notice that here in identified needs, we simply refer that we use student data and educational partner input without explicitly stating what that data is and what the educational partner input revealed. In the second column, instead of providing a description of how the action is going to address the needs of my unduplicated students, notice it's very general, that I'm just going to be providing increased in quality learning opportunities without explicitly saying what those are. and why I'm providing it on a LEA-wide or school-wide basis. And remember, we talked about simply stating that you have a high percentage of unduplicated students does not meet this requirement. Finally, in the last column, there are no specific metrics that I'm going to be measuring. I'm simply referring to educational research. There is an option to include requirements for LEA-wide and school-wide actions in the action description, and this is what that might look like. This is the same example I just showed you in the tables, but it's in the action description instead. It's color-coded to show the 3 pieces of the response. You are not required to color-code it, just we're simply using that so you can see where the 3 parts of the response are. If you choose to include the requirements in the action description, then in the increased and improved services section, it might look something like this, stating where in the LCAP, where in the action descriptions, you've included the required descriptions. Notice I have which section of the LCAP and what page number each of the required descriptions are. And that concludes this video. Next up will be limited actions and an explanation of those requirements.